It was a deceptively serene day. The waters were calm, the skies clear, and yet her mind was consumed by the reports that had brought her here. For weeks, strange ocean disturbances had been detected, large-scale tremors that suggested something extremely heavy was plunging into the depths. The team's sonar devices had picked up patterns that were anything but natural, and Mia's superiors at the Naval Research Institute had wasted no time dispatching her team to investigate. 20 miles offshore, the junior officer repeated, pointing to the glowing coordinates on the ship's navigation screen. "This is where the most activity has been recorded." Mia nodded, her expression stoic. She had seen many strange phenomena in her years as a marine researcher, but something about this case gnawed at her. The anomalies were consistent and strong, as if something massive had repeatedly disturbed the ocean floor. Whatever it wasn't random. By the time the ship arrived at the designated location, the anticipation among the crew was palpable. Mia wasted no time. "Prepare the diving equipment," she ordered. As the team scrambled to carry out her instructions, she double-checked her gear. It was customary for her to be the first to dive. Her experience as both a researcher and a skilled diver made her the natural choice for such missions. Minutes later, she plunged into the ocean's depths. The water, though cold, was stunningly clear, providing her with a perfect view of the seafloor as she descended. Her headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating the terrain below. It didn't take long before something unusual came into view. There, resting ominously at the bottom of the ocean, was a massive shipping container. Mia froze, momentarily stunned by the sight. The container was unremarkable in appearance, metallic, rusted in places, but its presence here, so far from shipping lanes, made no sense. She approached cautiously, her heart racing as she examined the object. There was no way she could move it on her own. The container was far too large and heavy. Resurfacing, she called to the crew above. "We've got something big down there," she announced. "Deploy the diving robot?" The team moved quickly, lowering the state-of-the-art drone into the water. Mia took control, expertly navigating the machine toward the container. The drone's extending claws locked around the object, and the ship's crane began the painstaking process of lifting it to the surface. However, the operation was far more challenging than expected. The crane groaned under the strain, and the ship itself rocked precariously as the container was hoisted from the ocean floor. "What's in there?" Mia muttered under her breath, watching anxiously as the container finally broke the surface. With a loud crash, it landed on the deck, sending a spray of seawater in all directions. The crew gathered around, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. It was Mia who first noticed something unusual. Despite being submerged for who knows how long, the container wasn't leaking water. Shipping containers weren't watertight, yet this one was completely dry on the inside. "It's insulated," she murmured, her brow furrowed. Why would someone go to such lengths? The mystery deepened as the crew worked to open the container. Using heavy tools, they broke the lock and slowly pried the doors open. The interior of the container was fully furnished. A bed, a couch, a table with chairs, every element of a modest living space was there, secured to the floor to prevent movement. Even more puzzling, there were personal items scattered throughout: photographs, books, and clothing. The photos depicted a man with his family, their smiling faces frozen in time. "Who would live like this?" one of the crew members asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Mia remained silent, her gaze fixed on the hauntingly domestic scene before her. It wasn't just the furnishings that disturbed her, it was the purpose behind them. Someone had lived here, someone who had gone to great lengths to make this container their home. But why? And what had happened to them? The team scoured the container for clues. They found little of significance until one of Mia's colleagues let out an excited yell. In his hands was a plastic bag containing a small recorder. Mia's pulse quickened as she pressed play. At first, the recording was filled with static and background noise, but soon a male voice emerged, strained and desperate. "I need to record this before they notice we are here," the voice said. "I don't know how much time we have. My name is Yusuf Ali. If you find this, please help us. We are on the Ever Cargo Voyager, but I don't know for how long. Please save us." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Mia replayed the message, but no further information could be gleaned. The recorder was damaged, and the rest of the message was lost. Still, the words were enough to send a chill down her spine. Yusuf Ali's voice had been filled with fear and urgency. Whatever had happened to him, it wasn't good. Determined to find answers, Mia and her team dug deeper. Their research uncovered a troubling history surrounding the Ever Cargo Voyager, a ship that had been sighted sporadically over the past few years. It never stayed in port for long, only stopping to refuel and offload minimal cargo. Despite being filled with containers, it often seemed to leave with as many as it had arrived with. Something about its movements didn't add up. When the team located the Voyager's last known coordinates, Mia's heart sank. The ship wasn't far from their current location. "We need to go," she told her crew, her voice resolute. "If Yusuf Ali's recording is accurate, we might still have time to help." The ship arrived at the coordinates within hours. The Voyager floated eerily on the horizon, its silhouette stark against the setting sun. From a distance it seemed abandoned. No activity could be seen on its deck, and yet Mia's instincts told her otherwise. She signaled the Coast Guard and local authorities, knowing they would need backup before boarding. As Mia and her team waited for the Coast Guard to arrive, the tension on the research vessel grew. The ever-cargo Voyager loomed ominously in the distance, a ghostly presence that seemed both still and alive. Mia's thoughts raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of Yusuf Ali's message and the disturbing evidence they had uncovered in the container. Who were these people? Why were they on this ship? And most importantly, were they still alive? When the Coast Guard finally arrived, accompanied by a team of local police officers, Mia wasted no time briefing them. She described the container's contents, Yusuf's desperate plea for help, and the troubling history of the Voyager's movements. To her relief, the authorities took her concerns seriously. After a brief discussion, the Coast Guard captain agreed to board the ship with a small team, while Mia and her colleagues stayed behind to monitor from their vessel. The boarding team approached the Voyager cautiously, their boat cutting silently through the water. When they reached the ship, they were greeted by an unsettling sight. A rusted, weather-beaten ladder had been lowered from the deck. The Coast Guard officers climbed aboard, their weapons drawn, while Mia and her team watched anxiously through binoculars. On board the Voyager, the scene was surreal. The deck was nearly empty, save for a few scattered pieces of equipment and containers stacked haphazardly along the edges. The ship's crew, if they were present, remained out of sight. The Coast Guard team fanned out, their footsteps echoing eerily in the stillness as they began to explore. Mia's heart pounded as she observed the unfolding scene. She could only imagine what the officers were encountering on board. Then, suddenly, one of the Coast Guard officers' radios crackled to life. "We found something," a voice reported. "It's people inside one of the containers." The words sent a shockwave through Mia's team. Yusuf's recording had been true. There were people trapped aboard this ship, but the officer's voice carried an edge of unease that suggested there was more to the story. The Coast Guard team opened the container cautiously, their flashlights slicing through the dim interior. Inside, they found a group of men, women, and children huddled together. One of the men stepped forward, his face immediately recognizable to Mia from the photos in the container they had recovered. "Yusuf Ali, you found us," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I can't believe it." The Coast Guard officers quickly assessed the situation, providing water and medical aid to the occupants while Yusuf explained their plight. He repeated much of what he had said in his recording, but added harrowing details about the conditions aboard the ship. The Voyager was a smuggling vessel, used to transport people under the guise of shipping cargo. The passengers had been promised safe passage to a new life, but were instead forced into hard labor under brutal conditions. "They tricked us," Yusuf said bitterly. "They told us we would reach a safe country, but once we were aboard, they locked us in these containers and put us to work. Some of us have been here for years, never allowed to leave. The captain and crew treat us like property." As Yusuf spoke, Mia's determination hardened. This wasn't just a case of human trafficking, it was a humanitarian crisis. The Voyager needed to be stopped, and its crew held accountable. The Coast Guard officers radioed for reinforcements, and a full-scale raid was planned. Mia and her team offered their assistance, helping to coordinate the effort from their research vessel. It wasn't long before more ships arrived, their decks bristling with law enforcement personnel ready to take action. The raid was swift and decisive. With the element of surprise on their side, the authorities stormed the Voyager, arresting the captain and crew without significant resistance. The remaining containers were opened, revealing more people, families, children, elderly individuals, all trapped in the same appalling conditions. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering, and it was clear that this was only the tip of the iceberg. As the Coast Guard secured the ship, Mia joined Yusuf and the other freed passengers on the deck. The relief in their faces was palpable, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what they had endured. Yusuf, in particular, seemed overcome by the weight of the moment. He shook Mia's hand firmly, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "You saved us," he said simply. "I don't know how to thank you." Mia smiled, her own emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "You don't need to," she replied. "You're safe now, and that's all that matters." With the Voyager under control, the authorities began the process of transporting the rescued passengers to safety. Emergency shelters were set up in the nearest port city, where medical teams and social workers were waiting to provide care. The media quickly picked up the story, and within hours the plight of the Voyager's passengers was making headlines around the world. For Mia, the aftermath of the operation was a whirlwind. She returned to her research vessel, exhausted but deeply satisfied. The container they had discovered at the bottom of the ocean had been the key to unraveling a terrible crime, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in what her team had accomplished. Still, the experience had left her with lingering questions: how many more ships like the Voyager were out there, and what could be done to prevent such atrocities in the future? As the days passed, Mia remained in contact with Yusuf and the others, following their progress as they began to rebuild their lives. The story of the Voyager, once a symbol of exploitation and despair, had become one of hope and redemption.